Hello, everyone. My name is Lynn. I am the program coordinator for the Fold. We are here at Fold Academy for October, and I'm really excited to have Chelene Knight here with us today to talk about energy and how to create a sustainable writing career. Excuse me. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. So the workshop is going to be about an hour long, and there will be time for question and answers at the end. So if you have any questions during the workshop, please submit it using the Q&A function. There should be a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen that has a Q&A. It's a little box with a question mark inside of it. If you don't see that, you might need to click the more button and it might pop up in there. We are using Zoom's auto captioning function. So there might be a few words that are not transcribed correctly, just to be aware of that. We are recording the video and it will be going up on YouTube next week. And we're going to make sure that all the captions are corrected when that recording is made available on YouTube. At the moment, feel free to pop into the chat, say hello, let us know where you are tuning in from. I'm going to keep the chat open for a few minutes and then I'll shut it down so that it's not too distracting. So again, questions go into the Q&A box, but right now say hello in the chat, let us know where you're coming from. I'm going to introduce Chelene. She is the author of 5 books, including Let It Go, Free Yourself from Old Beliefs, and Find a New Path to Joy. She is the founder of her own creative studio, Breathing Space Creative, through which she's launched the thriving coaching program where busy creatives can learn how personal development creates the mindset needed to better manage their energy and make space for all the things they are passionate about. So welcome, Chelene, and I will pass it off to you.
Yay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you everyone for showing up on your Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, wherever you happen to be. So I'm just going to go ahead and get some fun slides up for us as well. And just full transparency, because since we're talking about energy, I want to share with all of you that I am getting over a cold. And so if I have to cough or, sniffle or whatever, I'll try to mute myself. But I believe in transparency. So my energy is not 100%, but is it ever really? So a little bit about me. Again, I'm a writer, editor, personal development coach. I have previous experience as a literary agent, a magazine editor, a literary festival director. I used to direct the Growing Room Festival in Vancouver. I used to be a creative writing instructor. And so all of these different, vantage points really made me think about my own energy as a creative and working with so many writers. So many writers really led me to put this presentation together because I think it is so incredibly important and valuable. So let's get into things. The first thing that I want to say is that you folks do not have to absorb everything. And sometimes something that I share might feel a little bit new. And you might say to yourself, I don't want to do that, or I can't make space to do that. And I think it's really important to lean in with curiosity and ask yourself instead, well, how can I revise this to suit me and my individual way of living? So that's one thing that I like to put out there. And these 8 actionable tips that we're going to get into, they can help you no matter where you are in your creative career. So if you are on book 1 or if you are on book 31, these tips can still be quite helpful. So I can't go very deep into everything because we only have an hour together. So this is kind of like a gloss over just to kind of pique your interest into these 8 tips. And I suggest if there's 1 or 2 that really sound interesting to you, write those down and just start there. These 8 tips are there, but you don't have to do all of them, and all of them might not make sense for you. But this is just to get you thinking about what is possible in terms of taking back a little bit more control over managing your energy as a creative. And then one final reminder, getting closer to creative balance is a series of small bites over a long period of time. So I share openly about the big burnout that I experienced in 2017, 2018. And I've been recovering from that ever since. And that's been 6 years. So slowly diving into a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you folks today and finding ways to implement that into my ever evolving creative process and practice. That's really how I've started to change and shift the way I show up as a writer. So just a little reminder, you don't have to absorb all of this and you don't have to do all of this all at once. I'm currently in the sales, marketing, and publicity phase of book number 5. And when I look back at book number 1, I'm like, this is like a totally different exp- experience for me because I've taken the time to look at what took my energy in book 1, 2, 3, and 4, and just continue to tinker. And so I'm really excited to share with you folks these tips. So let's go ahead and start with this. Love yourself enough to set boundaries. Your time and energy are precious. You get to choose how you use it. You teach people how to treat you by deciding what you will and won't accept. So, if you happen to have a notebook with you, please maybe just jot something down for yourself. What comes up for you when you hear this quote? It might be something positive, might be something negative. It doesn't really matter. Write it down, and we're going to come back to this. So, think about this quote. Anything that comes up, just jot it down for yourself. So, let's go ahead and get into the 8 tips. I will say tip number 8 is usually the one that folks are most curious about. So, please stay with me. So, tip number 1, build your project pillars. And what are your project pillars? When you're making decisions about your writing projects, it can be difficult, especially if we aren't creating our own intentional processes, ones that are built from what we know about ourselves. Anytime you have a decision to make about your book, you want to lean on your project pillars. So, for those of you who are here today who have worked with me one on one, you're probably smiling, thinking, oh, Chelene, there Chelene goes with her project pillars again. The project pillars are your why. Why do you write? And why did you write this specific book? Or why are you writing this specific book? Danielle's laughing in the chat. Pillar 2, your book's action. What do you want it to do in the world? And I'll go into detail for all of these in just a second. And then pillar 3, your book's non-negotiables. What are you unwilling to change and why? So these are your project pillars. And I believe in establishing these as early as possible, even when you're just kind of getting into the idea for this book. Really try to lean into what these pillars are. So I'm going to go ahead and break it down. Why do you write? In my opinion, acknowledging why you are writing a book is one of the most important steps a writer can take. Not only does it guide your decisions regarding your current book, but it also shapes the trajectory of your entire writing career. Your why serves as the compass that directs you to the opportunities you embrace, the promotional strategies you choose, and even your approach to future projects. And then there are 2 whys to explore. There's why do you write? And why are you writing this specific book? So I have found that establishing my why helps keep me on track when I'm drafting. So if I'm sitting at my computer, I'm writing out this story, and maybe something comes over my mind, something kind of drapes over, and I'm like, I don't want to do this, or I need to go fold laundry, or I need to go do a million other things. I lean on my why. Chelene, why are you writing this book? Why is this so important to you? And that often pulls me back in, but your why can also inform conversations with your editor. So if you're a little bit later in the process and you're working with a publisher and an editor, knowing this why will help you have really powerful and beautiful conversations with your editor. It might help you pivot when you're in conversation about your books. Maybe you're in the promotional phase and you're being asked some really interesting, but maybe not comfortable questions about your book. I always go back to my why. I use it as an anchor and it becomes a conversation point. It gives me something to speak about and really dig into. So, my why sort of helps me figure out what I want to write next, which is pretty cool as well. And the action helps with that. And I'll get to that in just a second. So, let's move to the next slide. What is your book's action? This is a fun one. I try to think about my book's action as like a real person. It's out in the world delivering a very specific message. And if you see the slide on the screen, this is my actual book's action, like handwritten in my notebook. And so here you want to imagine your book as a real life person. It's out in the world, it's knocking on doors, it's spreading a very specific message. What would it say? How would it say it? How would they act? How will we know if our book is doing what we want it to do in the world, right? So, this is also a good way to measure and track and maybe even define your own version of success, right? Because if you know what you want your book to do, you tend to spend a lot less energy worrying about what our peers are doing or thinking that we have to be doing the same thing as them. So, when you know what you want your book to do in the world, it gives you your own rubric for success and can help slow down that comparison that starts to happen when we're watching what other writers are experiencing. So, I remember having a conversation with a good friend of mine, good writer friend of mine, and she was really upset. And she told me that she just was not happy in terms of where her book was going. She said, "My book is not successful." And she was really upset about that. And I asked her, I said, "Well, what does success look like for you?" And she didn't have an answer. We just kind of sat in silence. And I think those 30 seconds really taught me that we tend to, as writers, observe what everyone else is doing and measure our own success in that way without really ever thinking about, again, our project pillars. Why are we writing this? What do we want it to do in the world? And what are we unwilling to change about it and why? So these project pillars can really help, and especially when you think you aren't doing enough. Watching your peers out there thinking, oh, wow, they're experiencing all of this amazingness. I'm not having those same kinds of experiences. I must not be enough as a writer. So, defining this is a fun fact defining my own definition of success for my novel, Junie. So, that was a book that came out in 2022 and it did see a lot of success. It won a couple of awards, made some really cool lists. It's being adapted into a TV series. Like cool things are happening from that book. But for me, as an individual who defined the success of that book, I didn't see it as successful. And here's why. There was a very specific conversation around this unique layer of grief that I wanted this book to be out there having. And I feel like I did that a little bit, but not to the extent that I wanted. So, guess what that told me? There's another novel percolating in here where I want to dive even deeper into that thread that maybe I didn't go as deep into as I'd wanted to with that book. So now I'm creating a really strategic and aligned career path for myself because I know what I want to write next and why. So it's a really great way to kind of keep you on this aligned path. And again, a path that makes sense for you. My path might not make sense for you, and your path might not make sense for me, and that's okay. So now we get to the non negotiables. And this is a hard one for most, but try to think about the aspects of your book that you are unwilling to change and why. And I've learned very early on in one of my early publishing classes, which was like over a decade ago, that it's not worth fighting for every single change or suggestion, but instead figure out what's truly important to you and why and protect it. And I promise you, this will inform some beautiful conversations with your editor. It will provide, again, more speaking topics when you want to talk about your book, but it can really positively affect the shape of your book as well. So, for example, one non negotiable for my novel, Junie, was that I was not going to change where it was set. The book was to be set in Hogan's Alley, Vancouver, and that was a really important element of the book. I didn't want to change that. Even when my editor kind of posed a different setting and said, "Well, what if you did this?" I was like, and the way that I felt told me that that was a non-negotiable. So instead, because I've thought so deeply about it, we had a wonderful conversation about what was possible for the book, right? So again, it also increases your confidence as a writer, which is a beautiful thing because I know that's something that we all struggle with. So project pillars, tip one, it's a big one, but I promise you, it is a beautiful foundation to build. So tip two. Assess your current barriers in a proactive way without letting them hijack you. As writers, we love immersing ourselves in all the things that aren't working. We love to talk about how hard it is to find a publisher, how agents aren't responding, how we aren't making money, and the list goes on and on. But I invite you here to create a list of your current barriers. What's preventing you from moving on to that next step? And then here are three questions you can ask yourself to get this barriers assessment kind of started. Create a list of what you think your current barriers are. Can you look for patterns? Is there a common denominator? What do you really have control over? Make a list. Focus on one thing from that list, and then figure out who in your circle can help you and be creative here. So, I'm going to give you an example from my own past experience. After books 3 and 4, I was stuck. And I realized that the biggest barrier I had, and one that I could actually change. So, I'm not talking about all the barriers that are, within publishing. We'll get to all of that. But one of the barriers that I faced was there was a lack of clear vision. I know I had exciting ideas, but when I first started writing, I didn't have a clear vision for what I really wanted from my writing career. Again, there's that kind of subliminal messaging that we are all being sent that everyone has the same definition of success, right? So I was writing, yes, but without a solid understanding of where I wanted it to take me. I wasn't super clear about my message as a writer, as a human being. And my vision now, oh, friends, it's totally different. My vision now is not just about publishing a book, but it's about the type of writer that I want to be and the impact that I want to have. So, with that in place, I could align my decisions and projects to fit that bigger picture. So, this work that I've done on the vision led to launching, again, my own creative studio so that I can work with other writers and help them do the same. That was a really important part of why I wanted to be a writer, but I really didn't build that out into a vision. So focusing on one specific barrier at a time, I think is a really great way to navigate what's in front of you. So that's tip two, realizing that there are going to be a lot of barriers, but what's the one that you can focus on right now? So, tip three, this is a fun one, call in your community and keep them close. And here's what I will say. And again, learning this from experience, not all communities are created equal. Not all communities are created equal. We often assume that writers can simply come together and everything will fall into place. Yay, we all get along and everything's wonderful. But we each need something specific from our communities, and we rarely take the time to figure out what that is. So, what do you need help with, and who is the best person to offer this help? A common mistake that we make is assuming we can go to anyone for anything, especially if we trust them. So assess whether or not this person or this community is capable of giving us what we need. So what I like to do, create a list of as many people or communities as I can, and then try to fit them within specific categories. So my own coach called this, don't go to the hardware store for milk. So in other words, don't go to someone expecting them to give you something that they don't have. Totally changed the game for me, especially in terms of how I spent my energy. So let's take a look at these categories. Who can help you celebrate, troubleshoot emotionally, troubleshoot financially, troubleshoot editorially? And it's okay if it's not the same person. So I know my celebrate people, like my celebration people, are very special. They don't need to tear down my reasoning for celebrating. So if I'm celebrating the fact that I just finished the last stanza of a poem and I'm feeling really great about it, I have my celebration people. These people are not going to say, oh, that's a small thing. Why are you celebrating? No, they just immediately get it. They are on board. They don't need convincing. The people that help me troubleshoot emotionally, again, this is a very specific role. Not everyone in your life is going to fill this role in an appropriate way. Same with the financial side of things. Who are we comfortable talking about money with? Right? We have to really be honest with ourselves here because, again, we don't want to go to the hardware store for milk. So, and again, troubleshooting when it comes to working on the edits. for our projects? Who do we want to go to and why? So I often ask myself, well, where is my draft right now? If I just wrote this thing and it is rough and raw and I know my first drafts are exactly like that, I might not feel comfortable sharing that with my agent. I might wait till it's a little more polished and then share that with her. So I have a group of people, writers whom I trust so deeply, to find the gold in my rough drafts. And I often craft a very specific set of questions. Here are 2 to 3 questions that I'm curious about when it comes to this rough draft. Here you go, have at her, right? So again, I'm protecting my energy here because I'm not expecting something from someone who can't give me exactly what I need in that moment. So again, this is really micro stuff, but I promise you, it can totally shape shift your energy levels. And here's a good one, kind of piggybacking on the community one. I call this gardening, which is building and nurturing relationships. So for me, I'm not a fan of networking. Maybe it's just the word networking I don't like. I don't know. So I call it gardening. So, how many of you find it difficult to build up strategic, creative community? Like, really think about that. Is this something you struggle with? So, I've always disliked the word networking. And so, I built my own process, which aligns with who I am by allowing me to actually enjoy this community building versus trying to swallow someone else's oddly shaped definition. So, this is my gardening technique, which I break down into 3 phases. I'm a very seasonal person, and so this just really speaks to me. Every spring, I reach out to aligned people, communities, just to check in and say, hey, I want to let you know what I'm doing, and I'm curious what you're doing. And that's it. And then in the summer, I'll stay in touch. So I call that watering the seeds. I might check in. Are they working on a specific goal? Maybe I have a similar goal. Hmm, maybe that seed just needed to be watered. And then in the fall, I do some harvesting. I think about some aligned collaboration ideas and I reach out to these people and I say, hey, I know your goal is A, B, and C. My goal is A, B, and C. Here's where I am. Why don't we come together and try to do this? And I think that aligned way of working is a really great way for writers to build up trust with other writers and other organizations as well. So I nurture and build relationships via trust. So instead of just asking someone for something, I like to get to know who they are, what they need, what they're about, so that I can also contribute in a beautiful way. And I promise you, this shape shifts your energy. So instead of feeling like nervous. So, how many of you have to reach out to other writers and ask for blurbs, right? You're also like, I don't want to bother people. I don't want to ask more energy of them. But when you build relationships in this way, it's simply an exchange, right? So, that also protects your energy when it comes to asking, because it takes a lot from us, even if we don't realize that it does. So, tip number 4, I'm going to keep this one short because I actually have a full 25-minute video on this. So I'll put this in the chat. I don't know if the chat is still alive and open, but I'll put this video in the chat. And then if you folks do want to take a look at my organization video, you can. But if you already consider yourself to be organized, there's always room for refinement. So, again, one small bite sized example of something that I organized for myself is super micro. It's so small, but I was doing a lot of traveling. Obviously, you have to go to festivals and things like that when you're promoting your books. And I used to have a lot of anxiety around the packing. I don't want to forget my passport. Ooh, what if I forget my author copy? What if I don't bring my notes or blah, blah, blah? So I built out this really beautiful list. It's like a packing list, and it's just something I can just print out. Every single thing you could imagine that I would need to pack as an author, kind of going on tour, is there. And so again, it frees up space in my brain. I print this thing out, I pack, and I check out. Super simple, but there are all kinds of things that we can organize to reduce some of that energy usage. And this is really, really important. In fact, just last week, I discovered a new way for creating recurring tasks on my task manager. So, again, if you feel like you're already in a good place here in terms of organization, ask yourself, if you already have energy here, what if you could double it? what would that mean for your creative practice? And so getting organized is something that I also help writers with. So if you need help with that, just send me an email. Let me know what you're struggling with, and we can take that from there. All right. So next up, this is a really fun one because I think you'll see yourselves here. So consider the things you need to organize. And when we build processes for ourselves, we reduce the amount of energy spent making decisions, right? And if energy is currency, then it's better spent on our creative work. So start by identifying the systems you want to use and assign one clear purpose to each system. Then think about how these systems will connect to one another. And that's often the piece that we are missing. So, for example, how many of you have received the same information in an email as you received in a Slack message? They're like the same thing. And it's like, okay, I had to do twice the amount of work. I had to check two places. By not defining specific roles for Gmail and Slack, we create more work for ourselves, checking both platforms for the same details. So, again, things like this. If I'm going to go into my calendar, that's going to link me to Slack. It's also going to link me to my website if it's telling me to update my author page or whatever. All of these systems connect to one another, and they also have very clear purposes attached. Really saves my energy as well. So that's just a simple one. So, tip number 5, this is where we're going to spend most of our time. Guard your currency. So, I am of the opinion that energy is your biggest and most important asset as a creative. I believe this so much that I rebranded my entire business around this idea. So, the tips I'm going to share here within this category can be hard because they're often connected to the need to establish boundaries, right? Which requires a lot of mindset work. So be kind to yourself here. So the first one here is assess energy on a regular basis. So what can you eliminate, delegate, and automate? We often make assumptions that about what takes energy from us without ever really looking at it closely. I used to think I hated cooking. It took too much energy. But after this assessment, I realized it was the shopping component that I didn't like. Valuable data. So I was able to change that. Still do the cooking. It's creativity for me. When I'm cooking, I'm writing. But I outsourced the actual going to the store, gave myself back the time for my creative endeavors. So sometimes there's one piece of a task that drains you. Can you eliminate it, delegate it, or automate it? Build a monthly check in process when it comes to your energy, just because it will always change as you grow and evolve as a person. Next one in that chart is build emotional narratives. So, how many of you have added something to your calendar? Maybe it's work on your writing project, only to skip it when that time came. So, you see this time block in your calendar and you're like, I'm actually going to go do something else, right? That happens a lot. So simply plugging something in your calendar is not enough. I like to do what I call building an emotional narrative around it, which essentially is me building a story that reminds me why this is taking up space in my calendar. Why is this so valuable to me? So when I see that time block, it is not just the time block that I see, it is now that emotional story that replays in my brain. So if I set aside an hour to work on the drafting of my novel, I don't just see that as, oh no, I got to get the word count up. The story, the emotional story plays in my mind. And that makes me want to sit down. And that also affects the quality of what makes its way on the page, which is just a bonus as well. So here's one. I think this is probably the one that I'm going to scream the loudest. Don't make yourself so available. I remember when I was a kid in the 80s, 90s, if someone wanted to talk to me, they had two options. They could phone me at home or come over and ring my doorbell. That was it. Today, the options are endless. Instagram DMs, TikTok, different message boards, LinkedIn. I get a lot of messages there, emails, Slack. People have too many ways to get in touch. So, what I've done is I've started to think of all these online spaces as individual rooms in my actual home. So, would I leave the door to my house unlocked 24 hours a day so anyone could just come in? Of course not. So why do we do this with virtual spaces? The ways in which we communicate today has changed, and this is affecting writers. This is where a lot of the burnout comes from because we're making ourselves too available. So I've been very, very, very strategic here. I state my preferences in terms of how I want to be contacted and communicated with. I pick one or two social media platforms. I'm not on every single platform. If I post something about my writing, or maybe I post about an offering that I have, I might close off the comments. And that's not because I'm a terrible person. It's because I maybe don't want to spend a lot of my time sorting through the comments to find the information that I need. So I'm intentional about how available I make myself. And that is really important for writers today to think about. And then device notifications. How many of you have more than one device? Most of us have a phone. Most of us have some kind of a laptop or a tablet or a desktop computer. Do we need to be notified across all of these devices that we have a new email? What does that do for the brain? What does that do for your energy? I turn all of these off. There are no notifications that are going to go on or go across any of my devices, and each device has a specific purpose. So I have my phone. My phone is right here. I use that simply for communicating with friends and being on Instagram because I like Instagram. But this is my work computer. None of that's going to come across it. No Instagram notifications. No. Be very strategic about that and have specific times where I check it. That is a really big and beautiful way to protect your energy, is to think about how you're spending your time in this way across these devices. And it can be scary at first because you think, oh, what if I miss out on something? What if I don't get that email notification? And I say, if someone doesn't want to give you the time and space, the 24 hours at least, to check your email, then is that a really aligned opportunity anyway? I think it's an indication of how your energy would be spent should you even accept that potential opportunity. So that's really helped FOMO as well. The fear of missing out is just remembering that I want to be I want to be taking on aligned collaborations anyway, right? So all of these things kind of come into play. The next one is create a CEO day. If you don't like the language, you can call it whatever you like. But essentially, this is a day where I don't take meetings. And I have that day every week. And it's an opportunity for me to move at a slower pace. If you have a busy day job and you can't take a full day, maybe there's one day a month that you can take, or maybe 1 hour a month that is just yours that you move slowly. Again, make this work for you and your lifestyle. But again, this also ties into not making yourself so available and giving yourself an opportunity to create in a slower way. Again, think about what it is that, think about your project pillars, your why. Why do you write, right? Come back to that. All of these things are creating more space for you to be intentional with your creative projects. And then the final thing on this chart is be intentional about what you share on social media. So slow down long enough to ask yourself, why am I sharing this and what do I need in return? So again, I mentioned sometimes I turn off comments because I'm not interested in comments. I might just share something because it's like something I want to revisit later. And that's just for me. Or I might turn off comments because I want people to send me a DM with their questions so I know exactly where to find it. Right. So just understanding why you're sharing something and what you want in return. And when you're clear about that, you might find yourself posting a little bit less, or feeling the need to post a little bit less. All right. So moving along to tip number 6. This is a big one. This is lifelong work, friends. Establishing and communicating your boundaries. Again, this is something that I help folks with, but we're just going to kind of gloss over it just a little bit. So, common mistakes writers make with boundaries: we think boundaries are about other people. We don't think we deserve boundaries because we need exposure. And this is something I'd really like to talk about because, again, what is it costing you, energy wise, to consistently say yes to things you either don't want to do or just don't have the capacity to do? And I've built out an entire workshop on this very topic. If you're interested in that, please get in touch with me and let me know. Sometimes we say yes to opportunities out of fear, out of fear of an opportunity slipping away or maybe it never coming back again. And that's something I coach writers around all the time. But we have to start valuing our time and energy a little bit differently. And it does start with building a strong set of boundaries and then learning how to communicate them in various ways. So, some ways I communicate boundaries, very simple, very low stakes. The contact page on my author website. When you go to that page, there'll be some bullet points. Here's some things I need to make an informed decision. So if someone wants me to do a speaking engagement or a workshop or whatever it happens to be, here are the basic information points that I must have in order for me to again assess my energy. Can I make space for this? Is this something I want to prioritize this season? So that when I make an informed decision, and maybe I do have to say no to this opportunity, guess what? It's not going to take a lot of energy from me because it's coming from an aligned place. I've thought about it. I've have a whole process around this. And so it takes a lot less energy and there's not a lot of guilt. I used to feel incredibly guilty saying no to opportunities. And it would sit with me for days and weeks and just rack my body. That no longer happens because, again, the value scale has shifted. I understand the value of my energy and what I can take on at a specific time, and I'm good communicating that. And that has taken me a really long time. But I promise you, if you start to tap into this work, you'll notice some big differences in your energy as well. So the contact page on my author website is one. The email signature, when you get an email from me at the bottom, it says my response time is anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. So that helps me with my mindset thinking I don't have to reply like right now. Sometimes I do, because I do kind of like email. What a nerd. But anyway, I have that written in so that folks know and understand, oh yeah, okay, she might not get back to me right away. And again, this really helps you value the work that you're doing. It's helped me set my prices and my fees in a really aligned way and to feel good about that. So we keep our boundaries in our heads. In other words, we don't often communicate them. We don't consider the consequence of the boundaries being pushed either. And that's a really important one. So if someone just kind of ignores the boundary, they push against it, it's how we respond that matters, right? What are we going to do now that that boundary is broken? How are we going to preserve our energy? So this is a very big one. That's pretty much all I'm going to say on it. But if you folks, again, you need help with this, please reach out to me. So this is a fun one. I know I say that about all the tips, but start a CV for the soul. So in other words, this is a personal development tracker that I started for myself. So we always think we aren't doing enough, right? We are so focused on the word count. Let's see that number go up, right? And when it isn't, we think we aren't writing. And I'm like, because writing is so many other things. So we need to start having more honest conversations, I think, about what it looks like to be a working writer in today's world, which often connects to personal development that kind of happens in the background, right? Because that's going to affect who we are as writers and how we show up to the page. So with this tracker, I can check it daily for a boost of confidence. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I've been working with a lot of cool people. I've been taking a lot of great courses, workshops, really just working on myself as a person that can't not affect my writing and my career. So, okay, feeling a little bit better now. My energy is, not as drained. It also helps me to track a lot of these things, again, which helps me value my work. So when I get a rejection, and we all get rejections for our stories, our poems, our full length books, we get rejection all the time. I revisit my CV for the soul and I'm like, okay, that's cool, but look at what I've done. Right. So it's just kind of like a boost of confidence, but it also helps you pull on your lived experience as expertise. So this tracker, it's very short here, the little piece that I have on the slide, but it's actually quite long now. And this helps me pull on a lot of different topics and say, okay, well, I've done this. Maybe I could talk about this when I'm out there also talking about my books. So it helps you pull on lived experience and turn it into expertise, which is going to help us with tip 8 in just a second. So I work with a lot of writers who also offer workshops, right? So they might have a paid workshop that they offer. Having something like this also helps you set the price for these things, right? Because we are all community based. We want to support our community, but we also have to support ourselves as writers. So having something like this can really help with the mindset around how do you charge for something. And so this has been a powerful tool for me, something that I really love. So I'm aware of the time. We have one more tip, and then I'll open things up for questions. So here's tip number 8. I'm going to take a sip of water. And tip number 8 is use the previous 7 tips to brainstorm clear ways to make money from having a book in the world. So if you are a working writer, whether you've published a book or not, we're always concerned about money. Where does the money come from? And we often think if it's not coming directly from our advance or directly from royalties, then it doesn't count. But I'm thinking a little bit differently. So in publishing, we really don't talk about money enough. And I'd really like to see some change there. And we're told directly and indirectly that our money should come from a good advance. And I've seen lots of Twitter discussions about advances and all of that. But when we don't have much control over how these advances are decided, and the fact that most advances are not really advances because they are split into multiple payments over multiple years, why do we focus so much only on this? So I wanted to find a way for myself to look at my advance as a bonus instead of income that I rely on. And this is what inspired me to consider the various ways in which having just one book in the world can help you build a career around it. So I'm sure for those of you working on your author brand, this is probably something that you've talked about. This is part of the conversation. But here's some questions to think about. Once your energy is refined, it makes these steps a lot easier and a lot more manageable, I will say. So, what gives you energy? How can you connect that energy increasing task to your book and monetize it? For me, is these creative balance workshops. So I'm actually taking all of these 8 tips and figuring out how can I break them all out into like day-long sessions where I'm helping writers with stuff like this. So that could be so cool. I haven't done it yet, but I'm thinking about that because it gives me energy to talk about these things. Next question is, what is your overall message? How can you monetize it? Again, remember what I said in the beginning. I didn't have a very clear vision of where I wanted to go as a writer. Now I'm very clear. My message always connects to community support and care and guidance. How can I monetize that? Right? Again, it gives me energy, so I'm not going to be in burnout mode again. My boundaries are aligned. I've done all of these energy aligning tips. How can I take my overall message and monetize it? So I've written 5 books and 5 books in different genres, I will say. But there's always been a theme of love, care, and support in each book. It doesn't matter if it was fiction, nonfiction, poetry, that theme was always present. So I use that to refine my messaging around energy and have found myself doing speaking gigs, building courses, and coaching, all connecting to that core message. And that's been just energy inducing for me. So you can see how all of these things can come together in a really beautiful way. And the next, what's your superpower? How can you monetize it? And again, if you don't like the language, not everyone likes the word superpower, replace it with something else. But a superpower essentially is something that you do really well, something that gives you energy, and it could even be something that other people have said is a negative trait. So my superpower changes every season. Last season, I think I said it was coaching. Think this season I'm changing it to the shape whisperer because I think I have this unique ability to help other writers explore like the shape of their book. So that's something I've been focusing on quite a bit. And that's helped me in my editing opportunities and all kinds of fun things. The final question is, what is your unique opinion on something? How can you connect it to your overall message and monetize it? So my unique opinion is that we don't always need more time. We need to get better at managing our energy. And I've turned that into an entire business. And this business also gives me visibility as an author and vice versa. Now, not saying you have to do that, but again, when you understand and you are so clear about your message and your opinion, opportunities start to show up because you are out there pushing that message out there and people want to hear more from you. So I find that to be a really beautiful way to also get visibility as an author, which is something we discuss a lot in the industry as well. So let us see what else we have. I think we're going to move to questions. Oh, no. First, I want to bring you back to this quote that we started with. Love yourself enough to set boundaries. Your time and energy are precious. You get to choose how you use it. You teach people how to treat you by deciding what you will and won't accept. So maybe take a little look at whatever you may have quote, and has anything changed for you? Maybe not, maybe yes, but take a minute to just think about that for yourself. So I want to let you folks know I have a guided journal for writers coming out in January, and everything that we discussed here is going to be in this guided journal. So that's going to be really fun, where you can do some writing prompts and really essentially document your entire writing and publishing experience and have that in like a keepsake. And that's what safekeeping is as well. So I want to let you folks know about that. So let's open it up to some Q&A. If you folks have questions, Lynn, where do I
We
find that box? Oh, I
we
found it.
do. We have plenty of questions. So the first
Oh, good.
one is, well, first of all, thank you very much, Chelene. I took pages and pages of notes. So
Oh, good.
I'm hoping other people got some really good notes and some points to take home as well. First question is from Giselle. For those from marginalized communities that are likely to be in fight, flight, and or freeze mode because of needing to survive, I'd
Mm.
appreciate your advice on how to put that in context when managing one's energy.
Mm, this is a big one, and this is something I've experienced as well. And one thing that I've learned is that we do have a little bit more control than we think in terms of how we feel. So that often comes from trying to change the way we think and the way we speak to ourselves, which is really difficult to do. And when we do that, that's going to affect the decisions that we make. So we want to change our decision making. And that's really hard when we've been kind of conditioned to move in one really specific way. So that's something that I help writers with one on one. It's really difficult to unpack in, in a short session, but that's definitely something that I help folks with as well. Yeah. And we're all unique and individual humans. Yeah. That's a good question. Thank you.
That is a tough one. I totally feel that as well.
Yes.
Next question comes from Emily. What would you do on a CEO day?
Well, for me, this is an opportunity to not have any meetings. So I think that's the biggest thing where I can just move really slowly. But for me, because I work 100% for myself, that's usually when I'm looking at the back end. So all of my systems and processes, returning emails, just doing a lot of admin type stuff, but also kind of increasing my energy. So I'll have a 90s playlist kind of going, so I got my music and my vibe happening on my CEO day. And it's just a really nice gift to myself, right? So I'm still working, but I'm changing the dynamic a little bit. And that's been a powerful shift for me in my career. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Next question comes from Giselle. That CV soul tracker that you showed us looks incredible. I also love that idea. I'm going to go create one for myself.
Yeah.
But the question is, can you elaborate on the column C categories? The types I can read are personal and professional. Are there any others?
That's a good question. And this is where you would want to customize this to make sense for you. I think those are the only three categories that I put in there. But you might have something like self-care in a category called self-care. You might have something that's for your whole family. It could be anything. So that's one thing. I'm always going to offer folks like a template or an idea, and then you can come in and totally shape shift it to make sense for you. So I would suggest, yeah, making some different categories in there, but those are I think, the three that I have. I think that's it. Yeah.
And so I
I
guess like
might expand on that now.
the categories are like the areas of your life that this particular
hmm
thing applies to.
Yeah, because it helps me see too, like, am I spending too much time like on professional development? Because if you're like me, you'll see, oh, there's this new writing craft course. I want to take it. And if I look at my tracker, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been doing that like the whole year. I want to mix it up. Let me get in some personal development stuff. Like I recently took a communication course, which has shape shifted how I show up and present. And that's going to affect my writing career too. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do, but the tracker does many things, boost your confidence, reminds you of the value. It reminds you that you invest time and energy in yourself as well, which is something that we forget. We're only looking at that word count. We forget we've been doing all of these other things too. So I love that
Mhm.
tracker as well. It's a good friend.
Yeah, that's great. Um, Claris asks the next question. You discussed brainstorming clear ways to make money from having a book in the world, specifically connecting energy increasing tasks to your book and monetizing them. This might be easier for nonfiction writers to do, especially those in the self care, motivational, self help
Mm,
genre. But what about fiction and poetry? Are there some
yeah.
possible examples of connecting energy related tasks to books in those genres?
I love this question. And because I write in all genres, I would say yes, definitely. I started out creating, like, and I'm going to go ahead and just call it what it is, creating little weird craft workshops. Like, I get really interested in poetry, for example, like the verbs that we might use. And I remember I had a workshop on like verb usage and that's specific to poetry, right? So again, that gave me energy looking at all the weird components of craft. I can put that out and monetize that. And again, when you are very passionate about it, I think it takes less energy. So it doesn't have to be very directly connected to your books. Like, for example, talking about energy or self-help or any of that. Again, I found the common denominator in all of my books, which was just guidance. So that's very general and broad. So how can I help and guide writers? And because it's so broad, I found myself working with other creatives. So I'm not only working with writers now, like in my coaching program, I have a variety of different people. I have an interior designer, I have, academics, I have all kinds of people that I work with. So again, the more clear you get about your message and how it connects to your energy and all of that, the ideas will form. But I also suggest get together with community, with other folks who are interested in this, brainstorm together. I've gotten so many ideas because someone else just said something, and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? I love it. So I think it's an opportunity to gather community as well. If anyone wants to chat with me and brainstorm, let me know because I love this kind of stuff. I love to do it.
Okay, so Jennifer asks the next question. You said in tip 8 that your superpower can even be something that other people have said is a negative trait. Can you elaborate on
Yeah.
that?
Definitely. For me, the negative trait was my introversion. So I was very quiet, very kind of, preferred to just be in solitude a lot. And I was made to believe that that was a negative trait. I grew up believing being quiet was terrible and I had better change myself. But I flipped that into a superpower because I learned that in the realm of coaching, being able to be a deep listener and to hold space for someone else is one of the most powerful skill sets in that industry. So I'm like, as an introvert, I'm deep listening all the time. Let me take that superpower, flip it, monetize it. And again, it allowed me to show up in certain spaces, not so introverted, because again, it's connected to my energy. I get to 100% be myself, and it just transforms everything. So yeah, do some brainstorming, thinking about maybe something that someone has said to you over and over. Is it possible that that could be a superpower? Again, if you need help, send me an email. I'm here. I'm here to answer emails too.
Okay, and the last question that we have, if anyone else has any more, now is the time to get them in. The last question we have is from Andrea. Any suggestions for people who work full time outside of writing, but very much are trying to build writing lives?
Yes. And I have a few podcast episodes on this. So you can go to breathingspacecreative.com and click on the podcast. I have a few episodes where I talk about this. But one thing that comes up for me when I think about when I had a full-time day job that I had to commute, and I would be commuting like an hour and a half because I lived in like this part of the city that just took forever to get downtown Vancouver. Um, but I would do a lot of my creative unstructured play on the bus. If I had a seat, I'd be sitting down, jotting things down. If I didn't have a seat, one thing that I'd like to do is use the voice memo app in my phone. So I try to infuse creativity in every aspect of my day. When I was working my full-time day job, I would be very strategic about how I used my breaks. I wasn't doing lunch hours with colleagues. Mm-mm. That 1 hour was for me to tuck away and get creative. And I actually wrote most of, uh, oh gosh, I hope my former employer isn't here. I wrote most of my first two books on the way to work, but also in the washroom. Like if I had to go to the washroom, I know it sounds terrible, but I wanted to steal like every moment I could to jot down something creative. So I actually built most of my first two books in like patchwork kind of, finding creative moments wherever I was. And one thing that really helps, I will say, is redefining what writing is. If you can redefine this for yourself, for me, I value so much unstructured play, which is all the things that happen before you sit down and draft. So when I'm walking my dog and I live in a very green, beautiful area, the different colors of the trees, how would I describe that in a poem? If I'm not staring at this for 5 minutes thinking about it, I'm not going to come up with a unique way to play with language. So, really thinking about how writing is just so much more than the drafting. As an industry, we value the drafting because that's what, gives us that final product. But thinking about unstructured play when you're at your day job, I think is a great way to keep creative, no matter where you happen to be.
Right. So the slide that had your contact information went by very quickly. Would you be able to
Oh,
go back to that slide?
yeah, of course.
And
Hopefully that's
then
large enough font.
the last question is, any suggestions for disabled writers whose energy comes and goes depending on illness and injury flares with
Mm,
dynamic disabilities, etc.? Are
yeah.
there adaptations that can work for us?
Yeah, I love this. And I've worked with a lot of writers who struggle with certain things or have a very specific illness, injury. And so, what we do is we lean into what do we know about you? And so, we do a lot of self discovery type stuff. Like, for example, I worked with someone who is very aware of when her pain starts to show up and what that means for her creativity. So together we built out a plan. How can we be, and I know I don't want to use the word proactive because that's not always the best word, but how can we make a plan around creating a pocket of creativity before you know that kind of flare up tends to happen? So we just did a lot of self discovery work, and we'll take some of the strategies that we have and we together build out something that works for the individual, because that's one thing that I think we don't discuss enough of, is that what works for one person probably isn't going to work for another. So the more I get to know someone that I'm working with, the more I can help build that for them. So it's very hard to say, try this and do it this way and then do this and everything will be good. But I think overall, just, calling in kindness and self-compassion, that's something I work with folks on as well, because that's really hard to do. How can you be kind to yourself when your mind is telling you a very different story? And that's very deep and complex work that I do as well. So beautiful questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Um,
Mhm.
all right, just a few things to wrap up our session for today. I'm going to take over sharing if that's okay.
Oh
Sharing
yeah,
the
of course.
screen. So we have a short attendee survey that I'm going to throw the link into the chat. It takes about 3 minutes to fill out. And so we'd really appreciate getting your feedback on the seminar, what works for you, what's not working, what types of things would you like to see in the future, maybe certain presenters and speakers that you'd like us to invite. So the link is there. This webinar was recorded and it will be made available next week on YouTube, and you'll get an email with a link to that when that's ready. Our next webinar is on November 16th. And Saeed TV will be joining us to talk about how to write short fiction. Registration is open now, so you can run and go get registered for that. You'll find more information at thefoldcanada.org/academy. Our next big event is Fold Kids Book Fest that runs from November 5th to 9th. We have a really exciting lineup of authors and events for all age groups, including educators. And we also have a full day of activities and festivities at the Gore Meadows Library and Community Center in Brampton, if you happen to be in the Brampton or in the GTA area. So if you have kids in your life, if you are an educator, if you're a librarian, go check out thefoldcanada.org/kids for more information on how to get involved with Fold Kids Book Fest. And lastly, we're really committed to keeping Fold Academy free for all writers. And so in order to do that, we really depend on the generosity of our supporters. If you found value in today's workshop or in any of the previous workshops, please consider supporting us either with a one-time donation or with monthly donations. You can find more information on how to do that at thefoldcanada.org/donate. And finally, thank you again so much, Chelene, for the wonderful webinar today. I've got tons of stuff I got to go and now implement. And everyone here today also found a lot of value in it. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your long weekend.
Yay,
Take
thanks
care.
everyone. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.